Does this mean we're going?
This is it. We are rolling.
Yay.
It's good.
Stuff happening.
So, this is Radio Juxtapoz podcast day 2, right?
Sure.
And we have a very special guest, Brooklyn-based painter Jenny Morgan.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's cool because you're in the Juxtapoz at 25 show downstairs, so it was really nice to time this with you.
Yeah.
And you just off mic, you told us that you've been a hermit.
Yes.
So this is your first interview in 3 years?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of made me nervous all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like, we gotta,
I'm just finding that information out now, so
Yeah.
suddenly I'm like, oh, shit.
Yeah, so we have
Okay.
we have at least 3 years to cover here. What does being a hermit mean for you right now?
I wanted to feel less visible in the world, which is a weird sensation when you're an artist, because that's kind of the point, is to be really visible. And especially with social media, I think you can be visible in a way where as a digital form instead of a real form. So I've just been really wanting to be invisible, more in the sense because I needed to go deep into my practice and work through some stuff. I know I was transitioning through some ideas, and it's hard to do that with a lens on you. So I just
The pressure of a lens.
The pressure.
Yeah.
And a perceived pressure.
What does the hermit entail? Have you just been kind of like logging off of Instagram and all
I'm
that?
still
Or have you
present.
just been saying no to events?
I've been saying no to things, which I think...
How does that feel? 'Cause everyone writes books about the power of yes.
I know,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I think it's an internal decision, and I think there's power in saying no when you're not ready for something and just knowing that.
Yeah.
But now I'm in a yes phase because I need to push through some boundaries and some comfort zones. So
Yeah, like if you say no for 3 years,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you get into, what was the first yes thing that was like a very
actually, like doing a drawing for the show was a yes thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, like and then like I bought tickets to come to Miami like last week. So like just kind of deciding to like go and like be physically present somewhere
Oh my God, that's
and participate.
How has that experience gone? Because you've gone from one end of the spectrum to the complete opposite.
Actually feels pretty natural. I think that I'm in a place internally where I'm ready to be social and present, and I feel just more secure with myself. I think that when you go through a process of transition and looking at your practice, you're really looking at yourself in a lot of ways. So
Can you describe this transition a little bit more then?
yeah, I mean, I think it really relates to my museum exhibition in Denver, and they organized it in terms of being a retrospective. So I did my undergrad in Denver, so it was like 10 years of work, and seeing it laid out like that, it felt like a natural cycle was turning over. And my relationship to the self-portrait is changing, and I think that's just the place I am within myself, and maybe I've processed a lot through that action, and I don't need that as much anymore.
You don't need the self-portrait as much?
Yeah, I don't need the mirror as much.
Can you maybe describe this change in attitude then a little bit more? Where was it and where do you feel now, if you can verbalize that?
Well, the self-portrait was always a real safe space. Like, because I work with portraiture so much and with people who I know, there's an intimacy and a responsibility with everyone that you feel inherently, even though you try to unleash your full creative power and not take all of that in and do something really authentic. That relationship is really profound. And so I would find myself creating guardrails or something that I couldn't do to someone in an image out of knowing them or respecting them and not wanting to distort them in some way. So the self-portrait was a space where I could do whatever I wanted, and it didn't matter because it was my own face and my own space. And a lot of my practice is therapeutic and been about processing a lot of stuff on a personal level. And I got to a place where I just didn't need to see that so directly. And it's just been really complex to kind of weave through that.
You said something earlier, and I'm curious about this because I don't know if these things are bad words or if they're good words. But we were talking about emerging artists versus mid-career artists.
Yeah.
Are those bad words to you, or are they just kind of word? I mean, I'm always curious. Like, I don't know, because I've had that conversation with artists before. They don't know where to put themselves.
Yeah.
Do you have like any sort of conversation with yourself, like, I'm an emerging artist, I'm still, or I'm a mid-career, like,
Yeah.
those bad words.
I think they're just labels, right? And it's easier for other people to label you where you're at. And I think I always have this very complex relationship to what the outside views me as. And everyone views you differently because they all come from their own perspectives. But sometimes it's hard for me to gauge where I am in the world as an artist. And I think mid-career is also denotes age and, like, you know, where you are on that spectrum. And so I don't know where I'm sitting in all of that right now. So I don't know if that's a label that's put on you or if you take that on. So I'm still trying to figure out that.
Right.
There seems to be quite a large element of you processing and trying to identify and understand and manage, I guess, your position and relationships with other people in your dialogue. Where does this come from? Is that something that's always sort of that you've tried to be process and dissect, or is it something that kind of came through a triggering event, or what was the story there?
I think it's always been there, and I think being in this environment in Miami where that is the intent is to kind of place yourself in some kind of structure, that you become hyper aware of that. And just being in these rooms, in these parties, and just like the darting eyes, everyone is just like looking at who everyone is.
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
just such a fascinating social experience.
Do you I sort of this year have been really conscious of almost avoiding a lot of these things.
Yeah.
But as you do you find value in this, or is it more of just a great observational couple weeks of almost personal research?
I think it's great people watching, number one, which I do enjoy.
Yeah. Whatever angle you look at
whatever
it from,
angle,
it
whatever
is
angle,
fantastic.
It's amazing, and I think it was healthy for me to come down and just see what the market looks like.
Yeah.
You know, like I am very much a hermit, so I sit in my studio and I disengage from a lot very often. So I think it is healthy to come down and just see the other side of things for a while and just kind of dip in, you know?
We were talking about, but when you're actually in that zone in the studio, do you have a certain day-to-day routine that keeps you in this hermit mode for so long that you noticed that you were doing for 3 years?
Yeah. Well, the routine is more about being a workaholic, I think. And so I try to get to the studio 5 to 6 days a week, and that's where I go and process life. And I mean, I'm very, very obsessed with trying to make every painting the next painting that feels better and more resolved. So it's a constant goal to get to the next piece that resolves this other inner thing. I think a lot about psychomagic and how the act of taking an image that might be intense or personally triggering and manipulating it in a way that resolves something internally. And I think that's where the magic lies in making art. And so that's always the purpose, is to get in there and kind of process through something.
Right.
Do you find it conflicting then, the way that art for you seems to be something therapeutic and something that helps you work through your stuff or work through something that you're trying to internalize or put into some kind of emotion or something tangible? Do you find it conflicting to take that idea of a process and then take it into, this is my career, this is how I'm paying rent?
Yes, that's the reason for being a hermit for 3 years.
Yeah.
There was a conflict there was a schism. And I can't remember who the artist was to give them credit, but this quote about making work is constantly working on yourself and your wounds, but it's also constantly exposing them to the world. And so I think I got to a place where part of working with the self-portrait too is about knowing that you're able to disassociate from your body, like we all do at times. So the self-portrait's a way to kind of get back into your body, and that's always been a goal for me in the work. And I think I did snap back into my body, and so then when I saw myself externalized, I became aware that I was hanging naked on a wall, and it was like this awareness that vibrated through that I hadn't really experienced before. So I think that's really what I was processing, like how exposed I was.
I think like it's when a child first recognizes itself in a mirror.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it is kind of like a childlike transition.
Well,
Oh God, like even like when an ape sees itself in a mirror, and like all of that kind of recognizing yourself again. And it's a beautiful personal process for me, but then I had to figure out how that relates to the
How
rest.
you do that standing in a room full of people that are
Yeah.
that are looking at this as well,
Right.
taking something.
And what that
of-
means for my career, because the self-portrait's been such a big part of it.
Right.
You know, so
Is there been reading that you've done of other artists? Because there's a tradition of artists who've worked in self-portrait, done self-portraits. I just think of the really famous Lucian Freud self-portraits or whatever. But
and Joan Samel was
Yeah.
I think of her a lot.
Ed, have you read similar things about the way that they look at their self-portrait work over the years that you felt any kinship to, or is it something that it was almost like there wasn't even, you didn't even need to do any reading about what other people had gone through? You were like, no, I felt it. I don't need to look into it.
I think I felt it, and I think I take most from visually looking at something. So Joan was important for me to look at because it's all from her own perspective of her body.
Yeah.
So it's not an outside lens looking, it's her looking at herself.
Right.
And also how she transitions through her life and how her body changes.
Yeah.
She's still making this work and she's in her 80s.
Yeah.
So documenting her body through space and time. I'm still just thinking about all that stuff.
Right. So wait, if we were to see the newest work that you're doing now, would we all be surprised?
Not surprised. I think I've always had a really deep connection to the lineage of figuration and a very complex relationship to that. And right now I'm working for the first time with some art historical poses and contexts that I've been kind of avoiding through my career, but now I'm jumping face deep into it because I have to confront that. So I'm working with the odalisque, and I'm in a place where I'm more actively sexualizing the female body, which it was really important to me early on not to sexualize and definitely not to objectify. And I think that's why I work with the portraiture so deeply and emotionally, is that I wanted there to be a soul in the painting and it not be an object. But I think with where the world is culturally and what's happening with the female body, I noticed a difference with also an outside perception of the work and the female nude in general. And my attempts to not sexualize it, kind of fell to the wayside just because of where we are right now.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to own it and just be like, I can be in this space and just own it in a way.
Was there? Yeah, that's the thing. You say that you weren't sexualizing it, but that feels like it's almost an oppressive way of constructing something, because you should be able to sexualize anything you want.
Yeah.
maybe that's not quite the right thing. But if you want to paint a sexualized woman, that should be okay. It shouldn't be off limits because of the way that it's been portrayed previously or by other people.
Yeah. And I think that's where my relationship to feminism is changing, or I'm looking at that relationship, because that was the intent, was that I didn't want it to be a sexual object. And there's a whole thing with the male gaze and who's looking and how they feel when they look at it, and what your personal responsibility is for that. And I think I avoided that sexualization just to keep space there. But now I'm okay with all of that being in the same space.
Was this a conversation you had with the models the female models in particular, that you were working with through the years? Do you have these conversations with them as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Because some are friends who have never posed or taken their clothes off for a camera, so it's a different conversation. I have one model I work with who I paint a lot, which is Siri, who
was on the cover.
Is on the cover and stuff, and she's a model and she's comfortable. She's also a close friend, so she gives a different energy because she's aware that she's going to be looked at. Where this friend that I'm working with right now, it was her first time posing, and I can feel her vulnerability so intensely that I almost feel responsible for putting her out in the world in that way. So it took me 2 years actually to start the painting, because I just wanted to honor that.
And did she have I don't know if misgivings is the right word, but did she have Was she nervous about the whole
I think
project? Was she openly nervous about it?
No, she was excited.
Okay.
And I think she's anticipating seeing the image, and she's an art historian, so it's like a thrill to be in that lineage and see yourself as the muse, which is a really like beautiful concept.
What's that atmosphere like that you create in that moment?
It tends to be, I mean, it's obviously very intimate.
Is it just you and the subject?
Just me and the subject, and it's very thrilling. So I like almost like shake with excitement in that moment of photographing someone and being that vulnerable and that open. And I mean, it lets you get to know your friends in a different way too, that kind of intimacy.
A really different way.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really deep conversations that happen because you're so vulnerable with each other. You don't end up talking about the weather. You kind of go to some deeper emotional spaces.
But what was like the first time you had a nude model that was a friend? Have you become more of a veteran of conversation, or just to make people feel?
Yes, and I think as the photographer, you have a responsibility to make someone feel comfortable. But that's been kind of a play in the work. Is that for a long time, I would just have someone stand and not give them direction at all, and it was their kind of nervousness or their just watching what they do and then just photographing it and kind of catching some kind of authenticity or just original moments there by not directing them, and what comes out of someone being naked in front of a lens. And
how has this impacted some of your relationships with people, positive or negative?
Yeah, I mean, that's also something that I was processing, is as the artist feeling the consequences for the work that you make, which I don't think a lot of people really talk about that openly. I've painted my parents, and that's an interesting thing for them to see how their daughter perceives them, and did you
put on like devil horns and stuff?
That's family therapy, and it's
seriously, yeah.
Could you read the subtext here, Mom?
Yeah, and I took photographs of them once, and I've painted them through time, and I've seen for myself how it's changed.
Can you see the change in the relationship then?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's kind of the magic about working with people in your life, is that you can see these personal dynamics play out, especially looking at work that you've made in the past and then having moments of like, oh, that's why I did that, and that's where this is coming from, and seeing the unconscious that works up through. Like, you have a conscious moment where you have an intent, and every formal decision is actually an unconscious narrative that's coming through. So you make these decisions with paint and color, and then as a retrospect, you can see where that's coming from on an internal level. And that's the real magic of it all.
Where did this spirituality come from? I don't know, and forgive my ignorance, I don't know a huge amount about Utah.
Yeah.
Is that a particularly spiritual place?
Although you are our second guest from Utah, which is kind of impressive.
Who's the other one?
Anna Park.
Okay, yeah. So I've been actually doing a lot of research on polygamy and cult dynamics. I didn't grow up Mormon, but my heritage is Mormon. My dad was Mormon, and it's that religious influence is very pervasive. So whether you're in the church or not, it's the dynamic of the whole state and city.
It's omnipresent.
It's just omnipresent.
Always there.
Government. The whole city is designed around the temple, so everything is north, south, or east, west of the temple in terms of addresses. So
this is Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake City, yeah. So I think that my parents didn't raise me with any relationship to God or church, and that's something that I sought out as a young person.
But you didn't want to go down that path.
Yeah, and they didn't want to force me anywhere either. So I was interested in Catholicism because it seemed pretty interesting. So my mom took me to church, and I fell in love with the iconography and the worship, and the Virgin Mary being a contemporary goddess and kind of that meaning. But I'm a seeker, so I've kind of gone into every spiritual realm, kind of dipped my toe in and looked. I did the psychedelics and the ayahuasca and trying to find God wherever it is.
Right. Did you find common threads throughout this?
I mean, the common thread is internal. So, and I mean, I've heard it said that all of these religious arrows and spiritual arrows are pointing in the same direction, ultimately, on some level. And I think my relationship to spirituality in the work is to elevate it above human, and that's always an intention inside of it.
Well, do you think, and I think this because you and I both we're both from the West, and this, the further that you move west, there was like this further kind of exploration of identity and self and mysticism and all sorts of things. Like, once you get to California, it's almost on hyperdrive in some ways.
And it's very trendy right now too.
Oh, it's absolutely.
I feel like these ideas, like 10 years ago, I felt like a weirdo, and now it's like on trend. And so I have to like watch my language around it, and I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic to see.
What do you mean by that?
Like when you say vibes or aura, or there's deep connotations like tarot cards. Those weren't like a thing until 5 years ago, and it's all about self-reflection and divination, and I think that right now we do need a lot of reflection and self-care. It's like an intense time, and all of these are just mediums for parsing through that stuff. Yeah,
it does seem like a trend. We used the word trend earlier, and we were kind of like wondering if the word trend is the right thing, but I think, do you think being from the West helps you at all in the way that you practice your creativity?
It's the only thing that I know. And so, I mean, being on the East Coast and understanding those dynamics, they're still very foreign to me. So I still function as like a Western girl who grew up in Salt Lake City. Like on a lot of levels, like I'm aware of that identity.
Yeah, you haven't like pulled out the full Jersey vibe or anything like that.
No.
Yeah, okay.
I was interested. You said you made a comment earlier about your attitude to feminism and the feminist movement has changed. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you feel just now about the movement, the phrase, the terminology? Where do you sit with it at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I personally was deeply affected by the Me Too movement, and I feel like, growing up in Utah, there is like a deep history of suppression and repression, and that cultural moment of people expressing that stuff so publicly like opened up things for me that like drugs and church and spirituality couldn't do, and it was the social aspect of it was super important. And I think that I've had a complicated relationship with the word feminist, because I think that it has like denoted.
Sorry, we've just got the rats in the back. It might look like an amazing setup, but there is.
Oh, it's a pigeon.
It's a pigeon. It was a cute pigeon all along. Don't worry, everybody.
Who took a nap and then
just gave birth back there.
I think that actually might have been what just happened.
Yeah, so I've had a complicated relationship to it, but now I'm more comfortable owning that word and owning that language and understanding that I'm a woman working with the female body, and that has deep connotations.
Do you, because there's been like this really great conversation that's born out of like the last 3 or 4 years in the art world itself about kind of how male dominated it's been for eternity.
Yeah.
Like not just, forever.
For a while. Good couple of years of this.
Yeah.
As somebody who's taken a step back from a lot of this stuff over the last 3 years, and you've been able to perhaps, if you've given it a chance, observe it from this outside kind of way, what parts of the evolution or the conversation do you think are heading in the right direction?
I mean, I think it's all important, and I think that right now we're talking about identity politics. And so forever the figure was not supported, and if you came into art school wanting to work with that, you were probably tried to direct somewhere else. I felt that a lot personally, and I think now with identity politics the figure is hyper important because it's our bodies, so that's where we want to talk about everything. So I understand that the art world's really looking at that and dissecting that, and I think something right now that's happening culturally is we're having a big conversation about boundaries and what boundaries look like in all of these realms, and how to respect people and understand. And in psychology, boundaries create better compassion. So it feels like we're blocking things off and putting up guardrails, but I think for the moment it might help us step back and look at these ideas and these voices.
Do you mean that in a healthy way or an unhealthy way?
I mean, there's always going to be some unhealthy aspect to it. There's going to be an underbelly or a dark side to everything. But I think the intent is there, and I think that there's a lot of really smart, important people who are uplifting and bringing all this forward.
Do you feel that even just the phrase identity politics is
so
loaded or divisive to an extent?
It's all loaded, and I think working with a figure is loaded, and I understand that, and I think I'm the kind of person that can handle all of that baggage. Like, I'll sit down and go through it with you, like, for fun. Let's just talk about it. Like, so that's why I'm okay in that arena. But I know a lot of people who step back from it because they don't want to carry all of that and talk all of that because it's really heavy.
Right. I feel like, though, what's really nice about the conversations I've had in the last couple of years is I almost feel like I'm going back to school a little bit, or relearning things, or like
trying to unlearn.
Unlearn,
which is exactly, or I guess, or how I meant to say it was reteach myself to unlearn, or to kind of become more involved.
Just to be aware of your behaviors.
I think aware is the word.
And I think when you're 18, 19, 20, when you're really trying to discover who you are, you're so much more open to it. As you get older, you get stuck in the muck. But I find that I've had the best conversations with people in the last 3 years than I ever would have had when I was 25 or 26.
Yeah.
How do you think then that would, the way that you're using form and figure and living in the time that we live in, how would that change to, say, someone like Jenny Saville in her periods, in her era, where they weren't having this conversation? Do you think the ideas and the themes are similar and there's a thread, or do you see something that this is like an evolution in dialogue?
It's an evolution in dialogue because we're talking about more than white bodies, which is what we've been comfortable talking about for a long time. So there's a broader spectrum that's opening up, and it's challenging every other dynamic. I mean, we're going back and looking at art history, and we're talking about the dynamics of those artists and how they were unhealthy people, and do we still support that, How do you feel about that then? Because once we get to this point where we use certain terminology and we have certain mannerisms and awareness of how things should be because of the world that we live in, then when you go back through art history and you look at one of your idols, have you had any sort of moment where you've gone, shit, I've lost it, I can't like this anymore? Absolutely. I think that...
And name and shame.
Yeah, I feel like Egon Schiele, he's a messed up dude.
Yeah.
But the thing is that art and the visual landscape is like the safest space to explore all of those like really complicated human stuff that's like dark and heavy. And I don't know if outlawing that is helpful. I don't know.
This is a conversation that Doug and I have had a lot off mic over the last couple of years about, can we, not the cancel culture. Can we? How do you separate
the art from the artist?
Art from the artist, and that is such a complicated.
Especially for contemporary artists,
Absolutely.
There's not a separation.
Yeah,
I think
I agree with you.
You are a person, and you are directly linked to the visual thing that you're making.
Yeah,
and people know a lot about you.
Right.
And so there's not a separation.
Do you find it then that how do you process that then if you take, Caravaggio or Dali with his fascism, like does that change your way of looking at something like that?
I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, can you still like look at it? I mean, the go-to one is always can you still listen to Michael Jackson in a club?
Oh, it's so complicated.
You brought it up, didn't you?
I don't know.
I tried to squeeze this in an opportunity.
I brought it up in a panel discussion that Doug and I were on a couple years ago, and I got I got totally knocked out because I was like, I'm ready.
Well, that's the
I'm like,
interesting.
let's burn the sculptures down. I don't need it anymore. I can stop listening to it. I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the interesting thing about having conversation in general right now.
Yeah.
It's those guardrails and those boundaries that we're talking about.
Right.
Right? So, yeah, I feel very sensitive about all of that and very aware of it and still understanding the landscape in a lot of ways.
Do you think then there is still, with these boundaries, there's still the freedom to be able to push and navigate a new terrain?
Yeah, I think
this
that
hasn't created something that's like, okay, because I am of this, because I look like this, I am this, I'm from this background, I have to make this art.
Well, that's what I'm looking at in a lot of ways, like my own relationship to white bodies through history, and how that is what I mostly saw through art history books and lenses, and what's my relationship to that, and how does that form my idea of beauty?
Right.
I've been thinking about that in a lot of ways.
Because you mentioned it, like the piece that you have in the show downstairs is one of the first things you've shown in a bit. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the snake?
Yes. So the serpent energy is rising. I can see a lot of people working with it right now, and I think it's a collective unconscious energy that we're dealing with. Symbolically, the snake is about wisdom, and it's also very scary.
Which I admitted to you that, like,
Yes.
I listed pretty much like 16 fears to you, but snakes being one of them.
Yeah. So to kind of deal with the idea of the self-portrait, I'm working with a model and a woman who I consider to be my doppelganger, and I found her through a very interesting moment and sought her out, and she grew up in Utah as well, and we never knew each other, and then we met.
That's handy.
Yeah, it's very spiritual. That's like she's like and I'm painting her for her as a human. Like, I'm not just seeing her as a concept or a reflection of myself. Like, I really love and adore her and feel like she brings a lot to me. And she got a pet snake, and I was like, this is the perfect time to dive into all of this kind of deeper, darker underbelly of the self-portrait. So photographing her with her serpent, like, just slithering and writhing all over her body, and like how tame the snake was at the same time, like so sweet, and kind of just having that moment where you can kind of confront this very volatile energy and like own it and tame it in a way was also really empowering. So I think the snake energy is alleviating a lot of that internal pressure about the female body, like to kind of put in this like very dangerous element is alleviating the preciousness or the beauty around the figure right now for me.
So I knew my snake issue is just far deeper than just being worried about it. Oh, man.
It's original sin.
My next therapy session is going to be really interesting. Yeah.
It's a lot about shame. I mean, that's kind of what comes from the Bible and nudity, and Adam and Eve could have put these little leaves over themselves, but that was like a human-made thing, and God didn't want that to exist. And it's just there's deep roots for working with nudity and the shame that's involved with that and the complex things around there. So I feel like I'm going to the source in a lot of ways and just being like, I need to just face this head on and go through this murky territory and come out with some more information.
How have your parents been as you've navigated this then? Because you said, that there was a freedom, but you also referenced your dad coming from a Mormon background.
Yeah.
Like, I imagine if I was Mormon and I had seen my daughter painting a nude up there, I'd be like, okay, I understand that you're going through this, but for me, with such a rigid structure in such a huge part of my life, this is a conflict that I'm not necessarily prepared for.
I feel very grateful that my parents always gave me a lot of freedom and independence as individuals. I think coming out of the church, he understood what all of that meant. And so, I mean, it's very, you can't make work for your family. Like, that's something I learned early on, is that you have to really make work for yourself. And if you take in any other perspectives, like, what perspective are you going to take? Your mom, your dad, your friend, like, it's all a different perspective. So you can only create from your own force, and then, again, just kind of take on the consequences of whatever that is.
Did you feel consequences? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel consequences. I mean, they're emotional consequences.
Yeah.
You know?
They can't ground you.
Yeah.
You're a grown woman.
Yeah.
But
you
that
know?
extends to the friends that you paint as well. It's like there's so many positives and consequences. There's so many things that can go on when you get into that intimate space that seems like you're always juggling it, no matter what.
Yeah, and that's part of the magic, and that's part of the work that you're doing in the painting. And I learned early on that I can't paint strangers. I need to have some kind of relationship to have a root internally with them, or I do feel like I'm just painting a shell or I'm painting skin, so it's not as authentic.
It almost seems like if you started painting strangers, like you're just kind of you're going almost into like some sort of blueprint of just
exactly.
You lose some of the magic that you're talking about.
Yeah. And I know that's where my voice is. I always said if I wasn't going to be an artist, I'd be a psychologist. So I like working through all of these complicated dynamics and problem solving in the visual arena.
It's funny how you say that, because we had Jean Jullien on the other day, and he had referenced how he had an interest in potentially going to follow up a path of journalism, and then as soon as they say that, you start to see the work through the eyes of, okay, how would a journalist create this work? This is the work of a journalist. And with psychology, there was absolutely zero surprise there where you said that. I was like, well, of course it was psychology.
Yeah. I mean, it's about understanding people. And so making these visual representations of them is understanding them on a psychic level. It's very, you know.
It's never too late.
It's never too late.
You can just do on the side.
Oh, yeah.
Run your own therapy.
Well, I mean,
do you have to get you have to get licensed for that? I forgot.
No, unlicensed.
Actually, I mean, in some ways, I
forward.
feel like you've done a good job with us just now, so that's good.
Yeah, do me now.
Well, what's going on? What do we need to dissect? What's happening?
So much.
She is a psychologist.
So much.
But how does that make you feel?
Maybe.
Yeah.
So how is New York for you then the place to be doing this? Is there a particular energy that you feel that you're allowed to engage with these concepts
She hasn't
and
left
ideas?
her studio in 3 years.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I also really love the chaos. Like I do. I like, in a very simplistic way, I like having to walk really fast, and I like the pace. I like how global it is and how diverse it is, and it's also really interesting just to be a human and to know that you encounter insanity on a daily basis, and you can see that. So you see a spectrum of humanity, which I think...
But you still find it easy enough to be able to shut away?
Yeah, I think you get into your own patterns and routines, and you have your community and your support systems. And I love my community of artists, and I love having crit groups and connecting with these amazing people, and I think that just the ideas are constant. Like everything's constant.
Yeah.
So, and I like feeding off of that.
We were talking about how it's James Turrell can have his desert studio.
That's what he needs.
Yeah, it's what he needs. But there is still this energy and conversation happening in New York amongst artists that is second to none, really, in the world. That I can see would be hard to leave.
It's hard to leave.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. Like I haven't gotten to that place where I'm like, I need to peace out. I really want to be in that dialogue and in that conversation, and being able to see that level of art whenever I want. Like it's nice to like go to the Met if I just need to go and walk around and look at medieval paintings for a little while.
Do you like to take influence and inspiration then? Are you constantly looking through to see what people have been done? And is it, in terms of doing that, is how much of it is contemporary versus how much of it is historical?
I think it's 50-50. I think I'm glad that I have the access to the historical, and you can see when the contemporary is referencing the historical, and then you can really, there's only so many conversations really being had if you boil it down to core conversations and core themes. And it's nice to like loop all of those narratives together and understand these really basic roots that we're all talking about.
It's the end of the year, so like, and not to get under the best of situation, but was there a show this year that really stood out for you?
Oh,
or
God.
Anything in particular?
The first thing that comes to mind is I finally went to the Cloisters.
Okay. Yeah.
that are associated with the Met, like
Yeah.
up at the top of the island.
Yeah.
And that was super spiritual. And I feel like I am kind of taking a medieval influence right now, because it's so like subversive and surreal and without any coherent structure. And I think that's helping me break through my own structures and navigating and opening things up more. So I've been into the medieval, like, weird shit. Yeah.
Can you give some examples of that coherent and way of doing things?
Well,
Because I'm interested.
Yeah, I think, well, because I've been so I had a deep relationship with the photograph, and everything comes from that photographic session. And so I gave myself the parameters to really honor that moment that I had with someone. So I don't manipulate the body or distort it. I really just use color and some forms of blurring and manipulation. But now I feel more freedom to kind of open up and displace and overlap and make composites. So there's a whole like fourth dimension, I feel, that's opening up for me right now in the work that I'm excited to explore. And I think a lot of it's going to be with smaller works, kind of focus in and play a little bit and then take that to the larger scale.
Do you have anything lined up?
Yeah. So I'm going to be doing my next solo show with Mother Gallery in Beacon, New York.
Nice.
I like that it's not directly in the city. I think something about kind of having this like journey to go see something feels good for me right now in terms of my hermit lifestyle.
And that's a lovely place too,
it's
Beacon.
lovely.
I mean, if someone told me I could live in Beacon right now, I'd be like, I think I'm there.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
And I love Paola, the owner. We went to undergrad together, actually. So, and the dialogue that we're having about the work. Anyone I work with, there's a dialogue and there's an influence on the work. I don't know if artists really talk about that enough, like the relationship that you have with your dealer and how much that influences your work. And so I choose to work with people who are going to help me go in the direction that I want to go. And we're just having a great dialogue and a lot of freedom in that arena.
How many bad conversations have you had with dealers? Like, is that something that, I mean, I know that's something that artists constantly have to deal with.
Yeah.
But that's an uncomfortable thing once you've committed sometimes.
Absolutely.
And when you try to get out of, it's a divorce.
It's a divorce. It is a divorce. It's very deep and emotional because an artist is working with such sensitive material. It's not a commodity in the way that a lot of other things are, but it becomes a commodity. And so the energy between selling and it gets so deep, especially with the female body and selling. I mean, there's a lot of interesting like relationships there and talking about the odalesque in terms of sex work. And so there's that whole broader conversation that I've really been trying to turn through, which I think working with a female dealer is alleviating in a lot of ways for me, and having that conversation with a woman is like a safe space for me right now, you know? And I think when you have a complex relationship with a dealer, it really forces you to navigate your internal voice. And some artists are like, fuck off, I'm gonna do whatever I want anyways. And that's their style, and I think that a lot of dealers can play with that. And I know that for a lot of artists it can shut you down and make you make the same work over and over again too. Again, production mode and no positive or negatives, but I think each artist navigates it differently.
To what extent did school prepare you for these conversations and this really more practical way of being a stable artist?
It doesn't prepare you to be a business person.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that you have to learn and navigate on your own.
How do you do that then? How did you do it?
Well, business is just relationships, right? So it's really just navigating people and personalities and boundaries and how close you work with someone. So I think it's an organic process. That's how I've meandered through the world so far. And I also think that the structure of school doesn't necessarily stop. Like the idea of being critiqued that's constant. And then it becomes on a larger scale and it becomes more public, and you have to deal with being deeply critiqued on a public level, which you don't have to anywhere else really.
Right.
So that is
something that's very interesting. You have to be able to have thicker skin than a lot, because you are bearing so much. And if someone goes, I don't like this, you're like, oh, I mean, that's a lot to take in.
Yeah. And
But also liking is also a very weird.
it's a weird thing.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
We live in like culture. So.
Yeah. Well, and that relates to your success as an artist in a lot of ways.
Right.
You know, and it's a very it's a tricky dynamic to navigate.
And if this is something that's off the record, you could say it's off the record. But when you told dealers and galleries you work with, like, I'm going to take some time off,
It was.
is that an awkward conversation?
No.
Okay.
Because
That's
only because it was mandatory, like, for me as a person. So
Right.
I think when you make decisions based on really authentic needs, that it becomes a lot less complicated. It's scary as hell, and you have to figure out your life outside of that.
Right.
But it wasn't like, oh, I'm missing out. It was like, oh, like, I need to step back.
Did the retrospective, the fact that you had a retrospective, was that just made it a lot easier for you?
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
we kind of talked on that a little bit earlier, but
Yeah. Seeing.
it seems like it kind of was like, okay,
Yes.
now's my time.
Yeah.
Here's my exit for a second.
Or not exit so much as I can feel and see that I am entering a new phase.
Got it.
And what does that phase look like? And I'm gonna take some time to really chomp through that and figure out what that means for myself.
Have you seen anything here this week? Because this is a weird week.
Yeah.
Because you could go a couple directions. You could go social part of it, which is definitely major. I mean, probably almost more than the art at this point in Miami.
That's
But
that's a big part of it.
it's a big part of it. Is there anything you've seen this week that kind of, I mean, we might as well contextualize it. We're literally on a rooftop in South Beach with art fairs behind us, so.
I mean, it's so much. I don't know if I can pinpoint. I mean, I've seen a lot of my dear and close friends who I'm really stoked for. Carolyn Solis at Nada, her sculpture outside was really exciting to see. I want to mention a video at the PAM, but I can't remember the artist's name. But saw that last night at the opening.
We'll do a voiceover either, Doug or I.
Yeah, we'll just dub it in.
Yeah, put it in the side notes.
Yeah.
Other than that, I was kind of taking today to really kind of take in and look at all the art. I've been more social than I have been.
And then we put her on the rooftop.
Yeah, we hijacked that one. Do you find, and this is kind of just, I'm trying to think, because we're here working, you know, this is partly put together by Vans. Do you find, and as an artist, it doesn't seem to be operating much in that space, you know, collaborating with brands, is that something that you do at all? Is it, and if not, why? And is there a world in which you would?
It hasn't been in my practice, and I can't imagine it coming into my practice in that way. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't even really thought about that, honestly. Yeah.
It's funny because we do think about it all the time. I was looking at the wall last night, and that's kind of what I liked about looking at all the art, and that it's like, oh, not everybody. It's like everybody's got their own path, and it's kind of
even with like the rules you gave, like black and white. It's like, no, people can't. No, I have to throw in some red, or like you can't, like.
Yeah.
We're all boundary.
That was the only rule.
Yeah.
That was pretty simple.
It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
But really
it was the most complicated ask I've ever. So many. Well, I think a lot of artists were sort of liberated by it. Mm-hmm. I think some were like really went like super hard at it, and I think some were like, this is part of my daily practice. This is actually really just kind of nice.
I was going to do this anyway.
Yeah, I was going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't ask anything else but that, because I didn't want to. I don't know. I didn't want everyone to overthink it.
Yeah.
Or I wanted people to overthink it, but on their own accord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good prompt, right, to respond to.
I've been using prompt too, which is good. I'm glad you said that, because I feel like prompt is yes.
Yeah, and I was happy to participate. I'm not a drawer. Like, I don't sit down and draw and sketch.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
So even to work at that scale, I mean, it's still a painting. Like, it's still oil on like canvas.
Right.
So
that's fine. That's
I was like, am I breaking a rule? I'm not using a pencil. Like,
so you don't sketch at all? I mean, maybe we haven't talked at all about your actual process in the way that you go from, you know, a relationship into a painting on a wall.
Yeah.
So it's just all taken from one photograph, multiple photographs manipulated together?
Mostly just one photograph. I mean, historically, that's kind of changing for me right now. But
why? How do you do that without drawing or sketching, or is that not part of a technical exercise?
Yeah, I guess when I say draw, I mean, for me, you know, my undergrad was in illustration, and I was in a room full of people who grew up as kids that had a sketchbook that were like constantly in there, like doodling and sketching. And I'm a kind of artist that needs to look at what I see and process it and then make an output. So it's just two different ways that the artist's brain works, and I understand what end of the spectrum I'm on. So I think in terms of drawing, that's what I mean.
Mm-hmm. There is a degree of manipulation through color or through something a little bit more abstract or surreal, or there's a tint there in everything across the board. What's the purpose of that, and how do you decide what shape that should take? You know, what colors you're using, what is that abstraction?
I think that's my relationship to working through and mediating the psychological elements of it. And again, on a primarily unconscious level, like making color choices, responding to something in that person, and also maybe some influences that it's a conglomeration of a lot of things. I've been working primarily with greens the last 2 or 3 years in terms of monochromatic greens. And I've noticed art looking that all of the red paintings are really speaking to me right now. So I think that my psychology and my...
You going through a red phase?
I think that I've been so green that there's something inside of me that's like aching for some red. You know, and our relationship to color is so profound.
Yeah.
And that's the most like beautiful element of all of it. And it's light frequency and...
What color are you?
What color am I?
Any other time that would have been the dumbest question in the world, but
no,
I'm going with it right now.
Go with it.
What color are you?
Is this weird? I feel clear. Is that a color?
Whoa.
Transparent?
I feel transparent.
Whoa, that's a good answer.
I feel transparent.
That's a really good answer.
And I feel like that's in line with the invisibility needs too. So like I don't know, do you ever have times where you move through the world and you feel like people can see you and you feel like people are looking at you, and then you move through the world and no one's looking at you and no one's paying attention?
I'm really rooting for the latter one there.
Yeah.
At all times.
Yeah, so like being kind of consciously wanting to move through the world and not be seen. I've been in that space for a while, and it just validates that your whole experience is coming from an internal perspective. And so whatever like you want kind of just builds around you in a strange way. And I'm playing with reality a lot on that level and kind of like bouncing off of it.
That was the best answer I could have got to that question.
Seriously.
Evan, what color are you?
I was going to say, what color are you?
I'm the color of overcooked meat. Right?
I know, I was going to say, I think I'm like exactly this gray t-shirt at all times.
Hey, let's do this at midday when the sun is at its absolute highest.
I will admit, I can't believe I've held on this long.
Yeah.
But
warm.
let's be snakes and absorb the heat so it get cold later and you'll...
And you're wearing all black too.
I know.
I don't know how you do that.
But it has been cold here. It has been cold here. It's a New York thing. I'm bringing like this like black trend into this warm tropic.
It's good. But it's on your neck.
Yeah, I'm not directly.
It's on my forehead.
taking it.
What color are you?
I told you, I'm the color of overcooked meat. That's it. That is genuinely it right now.
So you're like a burgundy.
Pink, lobster
burgundy.
pink.
Burgundy.
That sounds a lot better than
feels very.
to be fair.
Feels very like mid-80s. Nice.
Yeah, I'll go with that. I'm a nice burgundy, color of mahogany and whiskey.
Yeah.
Is that your only Anchorman reference of the?
I think that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
What else could we ask her?
I don't know. I thought that came to a pretty natural conclusion. Why did you make it weird?
Because you can edit it out.
I won't. That stays in.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's awesome.